You know, usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this like comforting expectation of just pure mechanical precision.
Oh, totally. It's very much like engineering.
Right. You fall off a ladder, your arm swells up, you go to the hospital, and the doctor puts you in front of an X-ray machine.
Yeah, and they pull up the film and point right to that jagged, glowing white line.
Exactly. They say, there is the fracture that is the exact cause of your pain.
It's incredibly binary. I mean, broken or not broken.
Yeah.
You have a definitive, visible cause for a very specific effect. And we humans, we naturally gravitate toward that kind of clean, linear logic.
We really do. We just want the universe to be neatly categorized.
Right. We want an easy answer.
But the moment you step outside of like basic orthopedics and into the world of human development or psychology or sociology, that X-ray machine completely shatters.
Oh, absolutely. The diagnostic landscape just becomes remarkably murky.
It really does. And for this deep dive today, we are taking that exact same desire for a clean X-ray and applying it to something far, far more elusive than a broken bone.
Which is the concept of human success.
Yes. Because for centuries, we've treated success like a perfectly readable X-ray.
Sure.
I mean, the cultural narrative basically tells us that if you possess this massive reserve of raw talent.
Right, your innate gifts.
Exactly. And you apply, an agonizing amount of hard work, then boom, there is the bright white line of achievement. You are the definitive, quote unquote, self-made individual.
Which is, without a doubt, probably one of the most seductive narratives in modern history.
Oh, for sure.
We completely idolize the idea of the lone genius, the pioneer who pulls themselves up by their bootstraps against all odds.
Yeah, entirely on the merit of their own internal fortitude.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically the premise of every superhero movie and like every billionaire autobiography on the shelf.
It really is.
But today, we have this massive stack of notes drawn from Malcolm Gladwell's groundbreaking work, Outliers. And our mission here is to take that whole self-made myth, put it under a very harsh microscope, and just completely dismantle it.
Tear it right down to the studs.
Exactly. We're going to look at tech billionaires. We're going to look at rock stars playing in like sweaty strip clubs, math geniuses, and even some incredibly tragic commercial plane crashes.
Because what we are really looking for is the actual root cause of why some people soar and others just completely crash.
Right. And what the data reveals is, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Oh, definitely. Because the true underlying architecture of success is rarely just about individual grit or, innate God-given talent.
No, not at all.
It is almost always a byproduct of hidden advantages, deep ancestral cultural legacies, and these extraordinary, completely arbitrary opportunities.
Opportunities that certain people just happen to stumble into by sheer geographical or chronological luck.
Exactly. Just right place, right time.
So I promise you, the listener, by the time we wrap up this conversation today, the way you look at your own greatest achievements and, honestly, your most painful failures is going to fundamentally shift.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It really is. So let's just dive straight in. And we're going to start our investigation not by looking at massive wealth or global fame, but by looking at human health.
Which is such a brilliant starting point. We need to establish a baseline.
Right. We need to prove that even our physical bodies, like our literal cellular biology, are shaped by our environment and not just our isolated individual choices.
It's the perfect foundational argument. Because if you can prove that something as deeply personal as, say, a heart attack is actually a sociological phenomenon.
It sounds so crazy, right?
It does. But if you can prove that, then applying that exact same logic to a person's bank account or their career trajectory just becomes undeniable.
Okay, so picture this. We are traveling back in time to the 1950s to a town called Roseto.
Roseto, Pennsylvania.
Right. It's in the foothills of eastern Pennsylvania. It's this rocky, unforgiving landscape. And the town is essentially a closed enclave of Italian immigrants.
Yeah, and they all migrated from the exact same tiny village over in Italy.
Exactly. So one afternoon, a local doctor named Stuart Wolf, who's been practicing in the area for years, is having a beer with a visiting physician.
Just a casual conversation.
Right. And Wolf casually mentions that he He almost never sees anyone under the age of 65 in Roseto with any form of heart disease.
Which, to truly grasp how bizarre that statement is, we have to look at the medical context of the United States in the 1950s.
Oh yeah, paint that picture for us.
Well, this is long before the invention of cholesterol-lowering statin drugs. This is way before jogging became a national pastime.
Right, before aggressive preventative cardiology was really a thing.
Exactly. At this specific moment in history, heart attacks were an absolute epidemic in America. I mean, they were the leading cause of death in men under the age of 65.
Wow.
So for a local physician to just casually remark that he doesn't see heart disease in his town, it borders on the statistically impossible.
It's a massive medical anomaly. So
Yeah.
Dr. Wolf is understandably astounded by this. He brings in a sociologist named John Brune, and they essentially launch an all-out medical invasion of Roseto.
They really did. They pulled every single death certificate going back decades.
Yeah, they analyze physician records, they take blood samples from the townspeople, they hook them up to EKGs.
They even recruit medical students to go door to door, interviewing every single resident over the age of 21.
It's just wild. And the data they get back is completely mind-blowing. Literally no one under the age of 55 had died of a heart attack or showed any signs of coronary disease.
Zero.
And for men over 65, the death rate from heart disease was half the national average. In fact, the death rate from all causes was roughly 30 to 35% lower than what it statistically should have been.
So, of course, the immediate scientific impulse there is to isolate the variable, right?
Naturally. You want to know what the magic pill is?
Exactly. What is the active ingredient making these people functionally immune to the greatest killer of their generation?
Well, naturally, the first thought is the diet. I mean, they are Italian immigrants.
Right. You think of the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah, they must have brought over some pristine ancient diet. They're probably eating like fresh fish, light olive oil, and organic greens, while the rest of America is just eating Spam.
It's a completely logical hypothesis, but it completely collapsed the moment the researchers actually looked at a rose-tan dinner table.
Oh, this part is so funny to me.
It's great. The residents of Roseto were definitely not eating a lean Mediterranean diet. They were frying their food in lard.
Lard.
Yes. A staggering 41% of their daily calories came straight from fat.
That is absurd.
They were eating heavy, thick crust pizzas loaded with sausage, pepperoni, and eggs. And the traditional Italian sweets like biscotti.
Right, which are usually just for holidays.
Exactly. In the old country, they were strictly reserved for Christmas or Easter. But here, they were being consumed year-round because food in America was just so abundant.
Okay, so their diet is basically a modern cardiologist's worst nightmare.
Completely.
So if it's not the food, maybe they're just, burning it all off. Maybe it's this incredibly physically demanding culture where everyone is doing the 1950s equivalent of CrossFit.
Nope. The exact opposite, actually.
Really?
Yeah. While they did work hard in the local slate quarries, the researchers found that a significant portion of the population was actually struggling with clinical obesity.
Wow.
Furthermore, they were heavy smokers.
Oh, man.
So you have a town full of overweight, chain-smoking individuals eating lard-fried sausage. I mean, by every individual metric of health, they should have been dropping dead in their 40s.
So we rule out diet. We completely rule out exercise. What about their genes? Maybe this specific village in Italy just possesses like an ironclad genetic mutation that protects their arteries.
They systematically tested that theory as well.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they tracked down relatives of the Rosens people with the exact same genetic lineage who had settled in other parts of the United States like New York or Chicago.
Okay, and what did they find?
They checked their medical records, and those relatives did not share this magical health. Their heart disease rates matched the grim national average perfectly.
So it definitely wasn't genetics.
Right. So then they look at geography. They studied the two neighboring towns, Bangor and Nazareth.
And I'm assuming those towns had the same environment.
Exactly. Same geography, same water supply, and the same basic demographics of hardworking European immigrants.
Let me guess, their hearts were failing just like everyone else's.
Yep. The heart disease rate in those neighboring towns was 3 times higher than in Roseto.
This is just an absolute locked room mystery at this point. Every single logical, individualistic explanation has been completely and systematically destroyed. So what on earth was the actual answer?
The answer, incredibly, was the town itself, the architecture of their society.
What do you mean? Well, when Brune, the sociologist, stopped looking at their blood work and just started walking around the town, observing their daily lives, the invisible mechanism finally revealed itself.
What did he see?
He noticed that the Rositans were constantly interacting. People were stopping to chat in Italian on the street corners. They were cooking massive meals for each other in their backyards.
So just a very tight-knit vibe.
Very. And he discovered that it was the absolute norm for 3, sometimes 4 generations to live under a single roof.
Wow. 4 generations.
Yeah. There was a profound, deeply embedded cultural respect for the elderly. Grandparents weren't, isolated in nursing homes. They were deeply integrated into the daily fabric of family life.
So they were entirely insulated from the isolation of modern American life.
Precisely. In a town of barely 2,000 people, Brune counted 22 separate civic organizations, social clubs, church groups, mutual aid societies.
That is a crazy density of clubs for such a small town.
It really is. Furthermore, they operated under a strict egalitarian ethos. If you became wealthy in Roseto, the culture heavily discouraged you from flaunting it.
So no buying flashy cars to make your neighbor jealous.
Exactly. You kept it humble. And if you were struggling, the culture quietly mobilized to hide your failures and support you financially.
It's beautiful.
They had basically taken the cooperative peasant culture of southern Italy and perfectly transplanted it to Pennsylvania, creating this powerful, highly structured social safety net.
Okay, let me push back on this for a second, though, because understanding the mechanism here is crucial. Are we seriously saying that going to a social club or having your grandmother live in your spare bedroom literally clears the plaque out of your arteries? Like, how does a social structure translate into cellular health?
It's a brilliant question, and it really comes down to the biological mechanism of stress.
Okay.
When an individual feels isolated, overwhelmed, or highly competitive, which, let's face it, is the default state of the American dream.
Yeah, the rat race.
Right. When you're in that state, the body's sympathetic nervous system kicks into overdrive. You are constantly producing cortisol and adrenaline.
The fight or flight response.
Exactly. That chronic state of fight or flight causes severe inflammation, which directly damages the endothelial lining of the blood vessels, and that leads to heart disease.
Oh, wow. So stress literally tears up your arteries.
Yeah. Yes. And the Rositans had effectively eliminated chronic stress. Because of their profound communal support, no one felt alone. No one felt the existential dread of financial ruin because they knew the community would catch them.
That makes so much sense.
Right. That psychological safety acted as an epigenetic buffer, literally lowering their cortisol levels and protecting their hearts from the inside out.
That completely recontextualizes the entire concept of wellness. We always view health as this massive individual burden. It's a diet plan you purchase. It's a gym membership you have to sweat through.
It's all on you.
Right. It's a disciplined decision you make entirely alone in your kitchen at 16 a.m. But the Roseto mystery proves that health can just be a byproduct of a community.
And Wolf and Brune faced an incredibly uphill battle trying to convince the medical establishment of this.
I bet. Doctors wanted to see the x-ray.
Exactly, but you cannot understand why someone is physically thriving if you only look at their personal choices in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You have to examine the culture they inhabit, the density of their friendships, the structure of their family.
Wow.
The values of the world we inhabit have a profound, measurable, and biological effect on our physical bodies.
So imagine you, the listener, are looking at your own life right now. Are you trying to solve all your problems through sheer individual willpower? Are you completely obsessed with optimizing your morning routine while just ignoring the quality of your community?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is, because if Roseto teaches us anything, it's that you cannot out-diet, out-exercise, or out-meditate a toxic, isolating environment. The people around you are literally part of your immune system.
Beautifully put. And, if something as seemingly personal as cardiovascular health is actually dictated by our environment, we have to ask the next logical question.
Which is?
What about something that appears purely physical, purely based on raw, undeniable talent? What about athletic ability?
Oh, this is where the illusion of the meritocracy just completely falls apart. We are going to move from the warm communal kitchens of Pennsylvania to the freezing, ultra-competitive, cutthroat ice rinks of Canada.
It's a very different vibe.
Very. Because we are going to look at how a completely arbitrary administrative rule creates these massive life-altering advantages.
Right. We are dissecting the myth that the best simply rise to the top through sheer ability alone.
Exactly. So picture the scene. It's May of 2007. We are at the Memorial Cup, which is like the absolute pinnacle of Canadian junior hockey.
The biggest stage for these kids.
Huge. You have the Medicine Hat Tigers facing off against the Vancouver Giants. The kids on the ice are 17, 18, 19 years old. They are the future millionaires of the NHL. The game is broadcast on national television. The arena is packed to the rafters. Scouts are absolutely everywhere. To the naked eye, this looks like the ultimate, undeniable meritocracy.
You can't fake being good at hockey at that level.
No, you cannot fake a slap shot. You cannot buy your way onto a championship roster. If you are good enough, the scouts find you and you play. Period.
That is the beautiful narrative we're all sold about sports. It's supposed to be the ultimate level playing field.
But then you take a closer look at the actual team roster for the Medicine Hat Tigers. And this bizarre, almost spooky statistical pattern emerges.
It's so weird.
It really is. Of the 25 elite players on that championship roster, 17 of them were born in January, February, March, or April.
Just let the weight of that statistic settle for a second. 70% of a championship hockey team was born in the first third of the year.
Which makes no sense.
None. In a truly random distribution of talent, birth months should be spread evenly across all 12 months.
Yeah, it's so wildly disproportionate that if you actually do a play-by-play of the hockey game and you replace the players' names with their birthdays, it sounds like some bizarre astrological ritual.
Oh, please read that part. It's so good.
Okay, just listen to how ridiculous this sounds. March 11th starts down the side, leaves the puck for January 4th, who passes to January 22nd, who flips it back to March 12th, who shoots point blank, blocked. But March 6th gets the rebound. He shoots. February 9th and February 14th dive to block it, while January 10th looks on helplessly, score by March 6th.
It sounds totally absurd when you frame it that way.
It sounds insane.
But the underlying reality is a deeply entrenched structural bias. And the cause of this phenomenon is astonishingly simple, yet completely overlooked by almost everyone.
What is it?
The eligibility cutoff date for H-class hockey in Canada is January 1st.
Wait, meaning that a kid born on January 2nd is playing in the exact same youth league as a kid born in December of that very same year.
Precisely. And when you're dealing with 9 or 10-year-old children, a 12-month age gap represents an enormous, insurmountable difference in physical maturity.
Oh, sure. A year is a lifetime at that age.
Right. The kid born in January has had an entire extra year of bone growth, muscle development, and neurological coordination compared to the kid born in December.
Okay.
He is literally just bigger and faster.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. I get that a 10-year-old born in January is going to be bigger than a 10-year-old born in December. But by the time they hit 18 or 19 and they are playing in the Memorial Cup, puberty has leveled the playing field.
That's what you would assume.
Right. Biologically, the younger kids will eventually catch up in size. So how does a physical advantage at age 9 translate to a national championship 10 years later?
Because structurally, the system never allows the younger kids to catch up.
What do you mean?
They are weeded out before biology even has a chance to equalize them. This introduces a vital sociological concept known as the Matthew effect.
Oh, I've heard of this. It gets its name from a verse in the Bible, right? The Gospel of Matthew.
Yes, exactly. The verse goes, "For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath."
So basically, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Exactly. Sociologists call it a cumulative advantage. Let's break down the mechanism of how this actually plays out on the ice.
Okay, walk me through it.
At age 9, the local coaches are evaluating kids for the elite traveling all-star team. They watch the kids skate, and naturally, they pick the biggest, fastest, most coordinated kids.
Which, because of the calendar, are almost always the January, February, and March birthdays.
Right. Now, what happens the moment you're selected for that elite all-star team?
Your environment completely changes.
Entirely. You get the best coaching staff. You get ice time 3 days a week instead of 1. You play 75 highly competitive games a season against other elite teams instead of playing 20 casual games in the local house league.
Wow. That's a massive difference in reps.
Huge difference. So at age 9, that January kid wasn't actually a quote-unquote better hockey player. He was just slightly older. But by the time he is 13 or 14, thanks to thousands of hours of superior coaching and intense practice, he's actually become a better hockey player.
So the initial completely arbitrary advantage has compounded into genuine, undeniable skill.
Yes. The system creates a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That is just deeply unfair. And the crazy part is, it isn't just a quirky Canadian hockey problem either. You see the exact same mechanism operating in American baseball.
Really? How so?
In the U.S., the age cutoff date for youth baseball is July 31st. Consequently, if you look at the stats, kids born in August completely dominate the major leagues, while kids born in June or July are drastically underrepresented.
That's fascinating. And, if it were just about sports, it might be a fascinating but ultimately harmless trivia fact. But what is truly terrifying is that this exact same mechanism operates in our global education systems.
Wait, really? In schools?
Yes. Two economists, Kelly Bedard and Elizabeth Dewey, conducted an analysis of math and science scores from the TIMSS. That's a massive global test given to 4th and 8th graders around the world.
Okay, and what did they find?
They discovered that among 4th graders, the oldest children in the class scored anywhere from 4 to 12 percentile points higher than the youngest children.
Simply because their birthday fell right after the school enrollment cutoff date.
Exactly. They had an extra year of brain development before they sat down to take the test.
But surely that gap closes eventually, right? Like the hockey players.
Just like the hockey players, the system locks it in. Think about what we do in modern school systems. We are totally obsessed with early ability grouping.
Oh, like reading groups in kindergarten.
Right. Around kindergarten or first grade, teachers evaluate the students. The older kids, with their extra year of maturity, they sit still longer, they grasp concepts a bit faster, and they test better.
And the teachers probably confuse that biological maturity with innate intellectual aptitude.
Precisely. They mistake age for brilliance. So the older kids are selected for the advanced reading groups or the gifted and talented programs.
And once you're in that track,
you receive a more challenging curriculum, better resources, and more teacher attention. By middle school, just like the hockey players, they actually are smarter. The advantage has locked in permanently.
That is terrifying.
Bedard and Dewey actually found that the only country in their study that does not exhibit this massive birth month bias is Denmark.
Why Denmark? What did they figure out that the rest of the world missed?
Denmark has a strict national educational policy that explicitly forbids grouping children by ability until the age of 10.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, they deliberately delay the sorting process until the biological maturity gap between the January kids and the December kids has naturally closed.
I have to say, thinking about this makes me realize that our systems are not just unfair. They are unbelievably inefficient.
Massively inefficient.
It's like planting a massive 10-acre garden to feed your family, but deciding on day one that you are only going to water the seeds that happen to sprout on a Tuesday and letting the rest completely die.
That's a great analogy.
We're literally throwing away half of our global talent pool because of an administrative date printed on a calendar.
It's a colossal misallocation of human potential. If you are, say, a young boy in the Czech Republic who dreams of playing professional soccer, but you had the misfortune of being born in November, the statistical deck is stacked against you before you even buy your first pair of cleats.
So I want you, the listener, to run a quick mental experiment here. Think about your workplace. Imagine you're reviewing a stack of resumes tomorrow morning for a prestigious internship or an entry-level job. Are you filtering them based on who had early access to gifted programs?
Probably right, because they went to better colleges.
Exactly. Are you selecting for actual innate brilliance? Or are you just selecting the people who benefited from early random advantages? How many absolute superstars are we completely ignoring simply because they were born in the wrong month?
It's a very sobering thought, but it transitions us perfectly into our next core concept. We've established that a tiny, arbitrary initial advantage, like a January birthday, grants an individual access to more practice.
Right. The older kid gets 75 games instead of 20.
But exactly how much practice does it take to forge a true master? And more importantly, does everyone genuinely get the opportunity to put in that kind of time?
Let's talk about the magic number of greatness, the famous 10,000-hour rule.
Yes. So in the early 1990s, a psychologist named Anders Ericsson conducted a highly influential study at the Elite Academy of Music in Berlin.
Okay.
With the help of the professors, he divided the Academy's violinists into 3 distinct groups. First, the elite stars, the students destined to become world-class soloists.
Prodigies.
Right. Second, the good players, those who would easily secure spots in professional symphony orchestras. And third, the students who were perfectly competent, but were ultimately studying to become public school music teachers.
And they sat every single one of these students down and asked them the exact same question, right?
Yes. From the moment you first picked up a violin, over the entire course of your life, how many total hours have you practiced?
And the findings completely upended how we view talent.
Totally. All three groups of students had started playing the violin at roughly the exact same age, which was around 5 years old. In those first few years, they all practiced roughly the same amount, about 2 or 3 hours a week.
But then something changed.
When the students reached the age of 8, their paths violently diverged. The students who eventually became the elite stars began to increase their practice time exponentially.
Like how much?
By age 9, they were practicing 6 hours a week. By age 12, 8 hours. By age 14, 16 hours. By the time these elite students were 20 years old, they had accumulated a grand total of exactly 10,000 hours of deliberate practice.
Now wait, let me push back hard on this. 10,000 hours is basically working a full-time, 40-hour-a-week job for 5 straight years.
It's an immense amount of time.
It is. Are you telling me that if I quit my job, bought a violin, and locked myself in a room for 10,000 hours, I am guaranteed to be as good as Yo-Yo Ma? I mean, I refuse to believe that raw, innate talent doesn't exist. Some people are just born with music in their blood.
And that is the totally natural reaction. But here is the most astonishing part of Erickson's study, the part that answers your pushback. What Erickson didn't find was just as important as what he did find.
What didn't he find?
In all of his research, he could not find a single natural. He couldn't find a single violinist who floated to the elite top ranks by only practicing a fraction of the time.
Really? Not one?
Not one. And conversely, he couldn't find a single grinder, a student who put in the agonizing 10,000 hours, but somehow failed to reach the elite level because they lacked innate talent.
Wow.
What the data showed is that once an individual has enough baseline ability to gain admission to a top-tier academy, the only variable that separates the absolute best from everyone else is how incredibly hard they work.
So the hardware is basically the same, it's just the amount of time you spend programming it.
Exactly. Neurologists who study brain plasticity actually believe that 10,000 hours is the literal biological minimum required for the human brain to assimilate all the complex patterns needed to achieve true mastery.
That's fascinating.
It takes that long for the myelin sheaths to wrap around your neural pathways, optimizing the speed of your brain signals. Even Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who is historically held up as the ultimate divine child prodigy.
Right, the guy who was supposedly writing symphonies as a toddler.
Exactly. He didn't actually start producing his true original masterworks until he was 21 years old. By that time, his father had been forcing him to compose for exactly 10 years.
He had hit his 10,000 hours.
Precisely. And the legendary chess master Bobby Fischer, it took him precisely 9 years of obsessive, relentless play to achieve grandmaster status.
Okay, I understand the neurological mechanism. But we have to acknowledge that practicing for 10,000 hours is an insane, almost luxurious amount of time.
It's an immense privilege.
You cannot just simply decide to do that in a vacuum. You need parents who can support you financially.
Yeah.
You cannot be working 3 part-time minimum wage jobs just to keep the lights on. You need an environment that not only allows for that level of obsession, but actually demands it.
Yes, it requires a massive stroke of luck. You need to be placed in an environment that forces the hours upon you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's look at a cultural touchstone, the Beatles. We tend to view them as these spontaneous, magical geniuses who just burst out of Liverpool fully formed. But before they came to America in 1964 and revolutionized global culture, they went through an absolute crucible in Hamburg, Germany.
And to be clear, the Hamburg club scene in the early 1960s was not exactly glamorous.
It was a nightmare. They were playing in the red light district in these sweaty, dangerous, noisy strip clubs like the Indra Club. The crowds were rough, and the pay was terrible.
So why stay?
Well, here was the unique catch. The club owners in Hamburg didn't want short, tight 45-minute sets. They wanted the music to play constantly to keep people drinking. So they forced this young, inexperienced band to play for 8 uninterrupted hours a night, 7 days a week.
8 hours a night, that is brutal.
Before they went to Hamburg, John Lennon admitted they weren't actually very good. But in Germany, they had to learn every song imaginable just to fill the time. They had to figure out how to command a hostile audience. They had to build impossible stamina.
Yeah.
By the time they hit their first real wave of massive success in 1964, they had played an estimated 1,200 live shows. To put that in perspective, most modern rock bands don't play 1,200 shows in their entire multi-decade careers.
Wow.
Hamburg was their 10,000 hours. The environment forced the greatness out of them.
We see that exact same pattern of environmental luck when we analyze the lives of the super wealthy too, specifically the titans of the software industry. Take Bill Gates.
Oh, the Bill Gates story is the ultimate proof of arbitrary advantage.
It really is, because the cultural mythology is that a brilliant, isolated kid drops out of Harvard and changes the world with sheer brain power.
Yeah.
But if you actually dissect his timeline and look at his hours, the string of lucky breaks he experienced is almost comical.
Set the scene for us.
The year is 1968. Bill Gates is in the 8th grade. Now, in 1968, computers are the size of entire rooms. They run on cardboard punch cards, and it takes hours to run a single program. Almost no one has access to them, not even university professors.
Right, they were incredibly rare and expensive.
But Gates happens to attend Lakeside, an elite private school in Seattle. And the school's Mothers Club decides to use the proceeds from a rummage sale to lease a time-sharing computer terminal that connected to a mainframe in downtown Seattle.
A time-sharing terminal in a middle school in 1968.
Yes. So as an 8th grader, Gates gets to learn programming not with agonizing punch cards, but in real time.
Which is an advantage that perhaps only a few dozen teenagers in the entire world possessed at that exact moment in history.
Exactly. But the lucky breaks just cascade from there. Eventually, the Mothers Club money runs out because computing time is incredibly expensive.
Oh no. So what does he do?
Well, then one of the parents at the school happens to work for a company called C-Cubed, which desperately needs someone to test their new software on the weekends. They hire Gates and his friends, giving them free, unlimited computing time.
Just hand-delivered to him.
When C-Cubed goes bankrupt, Gates happens to find an organization at the University of Washington called ISI that lets him program for free in exchange for building a payroll system. In just 7 months, he logs an astonishing 1,575 hours on their mainframe.
That is basically 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for a high schooler.
He essentially lived in front of a terminal. And it still goes on. When ISI kicks him out, he discovers that a different department at the University of Washington has a computer that is completely free to use, but only between the hours of 3:00 a.m. and 6:00 a.m.
Oh my God.
So Gates literally sneaks out of his bedroom window in the middle of the night, walks to the university, programs until dawn, and then goes back home to go to high school. By the time he supposedly dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft, he had been programming practically nonstop for 7 consecutive years.
He had easily surpassed his 10,000 hours before he was even legally allowed to drink.
We see an identical trajectory with Bill Joy, the brilliant programmer who completely rewrote the UNIX operating system and founded Sun Microsystem.
What was his lucky break?
Joy happened to attend the University of Michigan right as they opened one of the first 24-hour time-sharing computer centers in the world. He figured out a glitch in the software that allowed him to bypass the hourly billing limits, and he essentially moved into the computer lab, coding 10 to 12 hours a day.
So he had his 10,000 hours logged, while the rest of his peers were still trying to figure out how to use punch cards.
Precisely. So, yes, you must have the discipline to practice. But more importantly, you must have the extraordinary opportunity to practice.
Right. But here is where Gladwell takes the concept to a level that truly blows my mind. It isn't just about the opportunity to practice. It is about being born at the precise, exact right moment in human history. He calls it demographic luck.
This is perhaps the most humbling data point in the entire book.
It's wild. Break it down for us.
If you compile a list of the 75 richest human beings in recorded history, a list that spans from Cleopatra and the pharaohs all the way up to modern times, a stunning anomaly appears. Out of all of human history, 14 of the 75 richest people ever were Americans born within exactly 9 years of each other, between the years 1831 and 1840. We are talking about the absolute ultimate titans. John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan.
How is that statistically possible? Why that specific 9-year window?
Because of the macroeconomic shifts of the United States. In the 1860s and 1870s, the American economy underwent the greatest transformation in its history. Wall Street emerged, the massive railway networks were built, and heavy industry just exploded.
Okay, so timing is everything.
Completely. If you were born in 1820, you were simply too old when the boom hit. Your mindset was permanently shaped by the pre-Civil War paradigm. If you were born in 1850, you were too young. You missed the ground floor of the opportunity.
Right.
But if you were born in the 1830s, you hit your absolute prime, your late 20s and early 30s, exactly as the Industrial Revolution fundamentally restructured the global economy.
That is incredible. And we see this exact same incredibly narrow historical window repeat itself a century later with the titans of the personal computer revolution.
Let's look at the birth years.
Let's do it. Bill Gates was born in 1955. His co-founder at Microsoft, Paul Allen, was born in 1953. Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, 1956. Steve Jobs of Apple. 1955, Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google. 1955, Bill Joy. 1954. What is the cosmic significance of 1954 and 1955?
The answer lies in the release of a machine called the Altair 8800.
The Altair?
Yeah, it was the very first commercially successful personal computer kit. It hit the cover of Popular Electronics magazine in January 1975. That specific magazine cover essentially sparked the dawn of the personal computer revolution.
You do the math. If you were born in 1955, you were exactly 20 or 21 years old in 1975. That is the perfect biological and sociological age to start a revolution.
Because you have no ties.
Exactly. If you were a decade older, born in 1945, you were 30 years old in 1975. You already had a mortgage, couple of kids, and a comfortable, secure job working on giant mainframes for IBM. You couldn't afford to quit your job to play with a risky, unproven hobbyist kit. Conversely, if you were born a few years later, in 1960, you were 15 years old and stuck in high school algebra while the industry was being built without you. You had to be exactly 20 years old to grab the opportunity.
It really makes me think of surfing.
Oh, how so?
Success is like trying to catch a massive, once-in-a-century wave. Yes, you absolutely have to be a phenomenally skilled surfer. You must have put in your 10,000 hours of practice on the board, developing your balance and core strength.
Sure.
But if you paddle out into the ocean 10 minutes too early, the wave just rolls right under you. If you paddle out 10 minutes too late, you miss it entirely. No matter how perfectly you have mastered your form, you are just left bobbing in the water, wondering why you aren't moving.
That is a brilliant analogy. And, acknowledging that Bill Gates caught the perfect historical wave doesn't mean he wasn't brilliant, and it certainly doesn't mean he wasn't incredibly hardworking.
Not at all.
It simply grounds his narrative in reality. His success was a joint product of his historical context and his intellect, rather than just an isolated triumph of willpower.
Which naturally brings up a counter-argument that we definitely need to address.
Okay, lay it on me.
If practice and historical timing matter this much, what happens when you introduce raw, unadulterated, freakish intelligence into the equation? Isn't a super genius guaranteed to succeed regardless of their birth year or whether they put in their 10,000 hours?
Oh, this is the trouble with geniuses. Let's transition into that and look at the ultimate test of IQ.
To explore this, we need to examine the life of Christopher Langan. He is widely referred to in the media as the smartest man in America.
How smart are we talking?
His IQ has been measured at roughly 195. To put that staggering number in perspective, the average human IQ is 100. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest minds in physics, had an estimated IQ of 150. Langan's intelligence is literally off the charts. It is a 1 in a million statistical anomaly.
The anecdotes about his brain power are almost frightening. I mean, as a child, he essentially taught himself how to read by the age of 3 just by looking at the comic strips. In high school, he could ace rigorous foreign language exams by simply skimming the textbook for 2 minutes while standing in the hallway before the bell rang. When he took the SAT, he completely aced it while literally falling asleep in the middle of the testing room.
That's insane.
He was casually reading Principia Mathematica, which is one of the most dense, punishing philosophical texts ever written, when he was just 16 years old. When you hear these facts, your brain immediately assumes, okay, this man is going to cure a major disease, revolutionize theoretical physics, and win a Nobel Prize.
But he didn't do any of those things. Today, Christopher Langan lives a quiet life working on a horse farm in rural America.
Which just doesn't compute.
It doesn't. And to truly understand why his massive intellect didn't translate into global impact, we have to rewind to a fascinating psychological experiment conducted in the 1920s by a Stanford University professor named Lewis Terman.
Oh, Lewis Terman is a crucial figure here. He is the man who essentially invented the modern IQ test, the Stanford Binet test.
Exactly. Terman was utterly obsessed with the concept of innate intelligence. He believed that raw IQ was the single greatest predictor of human success, so he decided to prove it.
Wow.
He mobilized a massive testing effort across California, screening hundreds of thousands of elementary and high school students. From that massive pool, he selected roughly 1,470 children who all possessed an IQ over 140. He affectionately called his subjects the termites.
He must have thought he hit the jackpot.
Oh, he watched them like a hawk. He tracked their health, their marriages, their careers for decades. He was absolutely convinced that he had just isolated the future ruling elite of the United States. The future presidents, the Nobel laureates, the titans of industry.
I'm guessing it didn't pan out that way.
Not even close. As the decades rolled on and the termites grew into adulthood, the results of Terman's grand experiment were remarkably underwhelming. A handful of them did very well, becoming successful lawyers or doctors. But the vast majority of these certified geniuses had perfectly average, ordinary careers.
Just totally normal lives.
Yeah. They became civil servants, middle managers, and accountants. A significant percentage of them struggled with unemployment and alcoholism. And to Terman's profound disappointment, not a single one of his hand-picked termites ever won a Nobel Prize.
But there's a twist, right?
A huge twist. Ironically, Terman's testing teams actually evaluated 2 elementary school children who did eventually go on to win Nobel Prizes in physics, William Shockley and Luis Alvarez, but Terman rejected both of them from his study because their IQ scores weren't quite high enough to make the cut.
That is the ultimate scientific irony. And it proves a vital concept that Gladwell introduces called the threshold effect.
Explain that for the listener.
The best way to understand the threshold effect is to think about height in professional basketball. Yes, you absolutely need to be tall to play in the NBA. A player who is 6'2" has a massive advantage over someone who's 5'6". But once you hit a certain threshold, say 6'6", an extra inch or two of height stops mattering.
Right, being 6'8" doesn't make you automatically better than someone who's 6'6".
Exactly. I mean, Michael Jordan was 6'6".
Right.
Once you cross that height threshold, completely different skills start to dictate success. Speed, agility, court vision, work ethic.
The exact same dynamic applies to human intelligence. The data suggests that the threshold for IQ is around 120. An IQ of 120 is perfectly sufficient to handle top-level academic work.
So anything above that is just extra.
Basically, once you cross that 120 threshold, having an IQ of 170 instead of 120 does not magically translate into more real-world success. You can see this threshold effect clearly by analyzing the undergraduate universities attended by American Nobel laureates in chemistry and physics.
Let me guess, it's not all Ivy League.
Exactly. Yes, you will find Harvard, MIT, and Yale on that list. But you will also find Holy Cross, Gettysburg College, and Hope College. You do not need a 150 IQ to win a Nobel Prize. You simply need to be smart enough.
And once your intelligence crosses that 120 threshold, a totally different kind of cognitive software becomes critical. Standardized IQ tests measure something called convergent thinking.
Which is what exactly?
They present you with a complex puzzle, and there is exactly one strictly logical, correct answer. You must converge your thoughts to find it. But real-world innovation, the kind of thinking required to win a Nobel Prize or invent a new technology, requires divergent thinking.
Psychologists actually measure divergent thinking with tests like the brick and blanket test.
I love this test.
Instead of asking for one correct answer, they ask an open-ended question. Write down as many different creative uses as you can possibly think of for a standard brick and a blanket.
And the results of this test are incredibly revealing. Gladwell features the test results of a student named Florence, who possessed one of the highest IQs in her entire school. Her answers for the brick were building things, throwing. Her answers to the blanket were keeping warm, putting out a fire, a makeshift stretcher.
Which are perfectly logical.
They are, but they are incredibly rigid and boring. Her brain found the standard, acceptable answers and immediately just stopped working.
Then you contrast Florence with a student named Poole. Poole's IQ was much lower than Florence's, though still above that 120 threshold. But his answers for the brick included to use in smash and grab raids, to use in a game of Russian roulette if you want to keep fit at the same time, to hold down an eider down on a bed.
And for the blanket,
his answers included to use as a tent, to make smoke signals, to use as a target for short-sighted people for shooting practice, to catch people jumping out of burning skyscrapers.
Poole's mind is totally subversive. It is chaotic, hilarious, and wildly creative. His brain effortlessly leaps from the concept of Russian roulette to a burning skyscraper. Florence's high IQ mind physically cannot make those imaginative leaps.
Right.
So if you are looking for the person most likely to disrupt an industry or invent a new paradigm, you don't bet on Florence. You bet on Poole.
Which brings us all the way back to Chris Langan, the man with the 195 IQ, and why he ended up on a horse farm instead of a university laboratory. To understand his failure, we have to contrast his life with the life of another undisputed genius, Robert Oppenheimer.
The father of the atomic bomb.
Yes. Both men had massive intellects, but their ability to navigate the real world was wildly, fundamentally different.
The contrast in their college experiences is truly mind-blowing. Let's look at Langan first. He manages to get a scholarship to Reed College, which is a very prestigious school. But after his freshman year, his mother, who is struggling and overwhelmed, neglects to fill out a standard financial aid renewal form.
A simple piece of paperwork.
Right. So Langan goes into the administration office to explain the situation, and the clerk essentially shrugs and says, "Sorry, the deadline passed, the money is gone."
And how does he react?
Langan doesn't argue. He doesn't escalate it to a dean. He simply accepts defeat, loses his scholarship, and drops out.
Wow.
A few years later, he tries again at Montana State. One day, the transmission literally falls out of his cheap car. He asks his professor and the dean to simply switch his enrollment to a later section of the exact same class, so he has time to hitchhike into town.
A completely reasonable request.
And the dean refuses. Langan feels the entire bureaucratic system is rigged against him. He throws his hands up in frustration and drops out of college forever.
Now hold that image of Langan giving up over a broken transmission and look at the college experience of Robert Oppenheimer. When Oppenheimer was studying physics at Cambridge University in the 1920s, he went through a severe bout of depression and anxiety. In a moment of absolute instability, he took chemicals from the university laboratory and attempted to poison his tutor.
Which is literally attempted murder. It is a massive felony.
Precisely. And he was caught. The university administration brought him in, fully intending to expel him and press criminal charges.
As they should.
But Oppenheimer, who possessed an incredibly sophisticated understanding of human negotiation, sat down with the administrators. He charmed them. He leveraged his status. He manipulated the conversation so masterfully that the university completely dropped the criminal charges, declined to expel him, and simply put him on academic probation.
It is unfathomable. Chris Langan, with an IQ of 195, couldn't figure out how to convince a mid-level dean to move his class schedule by an hour. Robert Oppenheimer convinced one of the oldest, most rigid universities in the world to let him get away with attempted murder.
The chasm between these two outcomes comes down to a specific psychological skill set that Robert Sternberg calls practical intelligence.
Practical intelligence. Okay, define that for us.
Practical intelligence is the ability to read a room. It is knowing exactly what to say, to whom, when to say it, and how to deliver it for maximum effect. It is the ability to assess a complex social situation, assert your own needs, and manipulate the environment to get what you want.
It is the software of the brain.
Right.
I love this analogy. IQ is your biological hardware. You could be born with a multi-billion-dollar supercomputer inside your skull. But practical intelligence is the operating system.
Right.
If you do not have the operating system installed to interface with the outside world, the supercomputer is completely useless. You can't even get it to print a document.
And this brings us to the most crucial mechanism. Where do we get this operating system? Practical intelligence is not genetic. You are not born with it. It is entirely a learned skill, and you learn it from your immediate family and your social class.
So it's about how you're raised.
Yes. To explain how this programming occurs, Gladwell leans on a groundbreaking study by sociologist Annette Leroux. Leroux and her team embedded themselves with families across various socioeconomic classes to observe how they raised their children. She discovered two fundamentally different philosophies of parenting.
Let's talk about the wealthy families first. They employ a strategy that Leroux called concerted cultivation. They view their child as a project to be carefully managed and optimized. They shuffle them between piano lessons, soccer practice, and debate club.
Right, their schedule is packed.
But the most critical element of concerted cultivation is how they teach their children to communicate with authority figures.
They teach their children to view adults not as unapproachable superiors, but as equals to be negotiated with.
Exactly. There is this incredible illuminating scene in Leroux's research involving a wealthy 9-year-old boy named Alex Williams. He is on his way to a doctor's appointment. In the car, his mother doesn't tell him to be quiet and obedient. Instead, she prompts him, think of some questions you want to ask the doctor. You have the right to speak up about your body.
Setting him up to lead the conversation.
Yes. So when this 9-year-old kid sits on the exam table, he confidently interrupts the adult doctor to ask about some minor bumps under his arms. He dictates the flow of the interaction. The environment is actively wiring his brain to feel a sense of entitlement, not in a spoiled, bratty way, but in a highly functional way. He is learning the practical intelligence required to navigate institutions.
In stark contrast, poorer families naturally gravitate toward a parenting style, Leroux termed the accomplishment of natural growth. These parents deeply love their children, but they view development as a natural process that simply unfolds on its own.
So they aren't shuffling them to a million activities.
Right. They provide food and shelter, but they leave the formal education entirely up to the school system. Crucially, because of their own societal struggles, they inadvertently teach their children to be deeply intimidated by institutional authority. They teach them to stay quiet, to not rock the boat, and to accept what they are told by teachers or doctors.
And this explains the tragedy of Chris Langan perfectly. Langan received zero concerted cultivation. He grew up in grinding, desperate poverty. He had an abusive stepfather who was constantly violently asserting dominance. His family was completely alienated from mainstream institutions.
He was never taught to advocate for himself.
Exactly. So when Langan arrived at college and immediately faced an administrative hurdle, a missing form, a broken car, he completely lacked the practical intelligence required to solve it. He possessed the 195 IQ, but his childhood had wired his brain to retreat in the face of authority. He didn't know how to negotiate with the dean because no one had ever taught him how. That is why he is feeding horses on a farm, and Oppenheimer built the atomic bomb.
It is a profound and deeply tragic realization. As a society, we squander immeasurable amounts of genius because we stubbornly assume that raw intellect is enough to overcome a lack of social software. It is not.
Okay, so we've seen how our immediate family environment, our parents and our social class, programs us with the software of practical intelligence. But what happens when we zoom out even further? What about the deeper, older programming?
The ancestral legacies.
Yes, the ancestral cultural legacies that are handed down over centuries. That takes us into the power of cultural legacies, and we're going to look at two drastically different examples. A Jewish lawyer in New York and a tragic plane crash in Guam.
Let's start with the narrative of Joe Flom. For decades, Joe Flom was one of the most terrifyingly powerful and wildly wealthy corporate lawyers in New York City. He was the driving force behind the elite law firm Skadden Arps.
And once again, the standard mythology surrounding Flom is that he's just a brilliant, scrappy kid from a poor neighborhood who conquered the legal world through sheer, undeniable brain power.
The self-made man again.
Exactly. But when we apply the Gladwell microscope, we discovered that Flom was the beneficiary of three incredibly specific, hidden cultural advantages that created a perfect storm for his dominance.
His first hidden advantage was ironically born out of severe discrimination. Joe Flom was Jewish, and he was trying to enter the elite New York legal world in the late 1940s and 1950s. At that specific moment in history, the prestigious old money white shoe law firms, the ones that represented the major banks and established corporations, were aggressively exclusionary.
You were basically just country clubs.
Totally. They possessed a very specific cultural pedigree, and they flat out refused to hire Jewish lawyers, regardless of how brilliant they were.
So Flom and his Jewish peers were entirely locked out of the traditional path to success. They had to start their own scrappy, independent firms. And because the elite firms monopolized all the polite, respectable, legal work like writing wills or handling basic corporate taxes, Flom's firm had to take whatever work they could get.
The leftovers.
Right. And the work they got was the dirty work. They handled hostile corporate takeovers, aggressive proxy fights, and messy shareholder litigation. The polite white shoe firms despised this kind of work. They thought it was ungentlemanly and beneath them. So for 20 straight years, Joe Flom handles almost every major proxy fight in New York. He is putting in his 10,000 hours, mastering this highly specific, incredibly aggressive legal skill set.
Then the economic landscape shifts entirely. The 1970s hit. The polite rules of the financial world collapse. Capital becomes more aggressive, and hostile takeovers become the absolute standard operating procedure for Wall Street.
Timing again?
Exactly. Suddenly, the giant corporations desperately need lawyers who know how to wage war in a proxy fight, and who is the only man in New York with a 20-year, 10,000-hour monopoly on that exact set of skills. Joe Flom. What initially appeared to be a crippling discriminatory disadvantage had quietly morphed into an insurmountable monopoly on the most valuable legal skills in the world.
Incredible. His second advantage was our old friend, demographic luck. Flom was born in the early 1930s. Right in the deep trough of the Great Depression. During the Depression, families stopped having children because they couldn't afford them. The birth rate plummeted.
So he had less competition.
Exactly. When Flom went to the public school system, his classes were small and well-funded. When he applied to university, the applicant pool was tiny. When he hit the job market, there was a desperate shortage of professionals. He rode a massive demographic wave of low competition.
But it is his third advantage that truly illustrates the power of cultural legacy. Joe Flom's parents, like hundreds of thousands of Eastern European Jewish immigrants of that era, worked in the booming garment industry in New York City. And the garment industry was grueling, brutal labor. But crucially, it was a very specific psychological category of labor that sociologists classify as meaningful work.
This concept of meaningful work is so vital. It fundamentally changes how a human being views the concept of effort. Meaningful work has three distinct components. First, it involves complexity.
It engages your mind?
Yes. You aren't just standing on an assembly line turning the exact same screw for 8 hours. In the garment industry, you are measuring fabrics, cutting patterns, negotiating with suppliers, and predicting fashion trends. Second, it involves autonomy. Many of these immigrants ran their own small shops or worked as independent contractors. They had control over their daily schedule.
And the third?
The third, and most importantly, there was a direct, undeniable link between effort and reward. The harder you work, the more garments you produce, the more money you make for your family.
When an entire generation of immigrants immerses themselves in meaningful work, they deeply internalize a profoundly optimistic worldview. That hard work, exhausting, endless, agonizing hard work actually pays off. That effort directly shapes your destiny. That is an incredibly powerful cultural lesson to pass down to your children at the dinner table. So when Joe Flom eventually goes to law school and enters the legal battlefield, he brings the relentless, optimistic work ethic of the garment industry with him. He doesn't flinch at working 18-hour days because his ancestral culture taught him that effort equals tangible reward.
His success is a tapestry. It isn't just about his intellect. It is about being Jewish in the 1950s, being born in the demographic trough of the 1930s, and inheriting the psychological legacy of the garment worker.
No, we must pivot and examine the dark side of cultural legacy. We have seen how a culture can wire you for success, but what happens when an ancestral cultural legacy is completely misaligned with a modern high-stakes environment? We need to discuss the ethnic theory of plane crashes.
This is genuinely one of the most harrowing parts of the data. We are looking at the tragedy of Korean Air Flight 801, which crashed into a hillside in Guam in 1997. The terrifying reality of this crash is that the plane was functioning perfectly.
The mechanics were fine.
Exactly. It didn't crash because of a freak typhoon. It didn't crash because the engines caught fire. It crashed because of deeply embedded cultural programming.
To comprehend this, we have to introduce a metric developed by sociologists called the Power Distance Index, or PDI. PDI measures how a specific culture views, values, and respects hierarchy and authority. Different countries have wildly different baseline PDI scores.
Give me an example.
The United States, for example, has a notoriously low PDI. Americans are culturally conditioned to challenge authority. We call our bosses by their first names. If an American subordinate thinks their manager is making a mistake, they will generally speak up and say so.
Very true.
Traditional South Korean culture, however, has historically possessed a very high PDI. You show profound deference to your elders and your organizational superiors. You do not contradict them directly, as it would be considered a deeply shameful loss of face.
So take that deeply ingrained cultural programming and place it inside the high-stress, rapidly deteriorating environment of a commercial airline cockpit. The captain of Flight 801 is flying the plane. He's exhausted, it is dark, and he is making a catastrophic navigational error. He is slowly flying a fully loaded commercial jet directly into a mountain.
It's just a horrifying scenario.
It is. Sitting right next to him are the first officer and the flight engineer. They are looking at the instruments. They see the danger. They know, with absolute certainty, that something is fatally wrong. But because of their high PDI cultural legacy, it is literally psychologically impossible for them to turn to the superior officer and scream, "Captain, you are crashing the plane. Pull up immediately."
Their ancestral software simply will not allow them to be that direct. Instead, they resort to a linguistic strategy called mitigated speech. Mitigated speech is an attempt to downplay the urgency of a message to soften the blow to the superior's ego. The first officer looks at the weather radar, sees the mountain approaching, and instead of taking control, he says to the captain, "Captain, the weather radar has helped us a lot."
He is desperately dropping a hint. He is begging the captain to look at the radar himself so the captain can discover the mountain without being corrected by a subordinate.
Exactly. A moment later, the flight engineer tries his own mitigated hint. She says, "Captain, isn't it raining more?" But the captain is deeply fatigued. His cognitive load is maxed out. He misses the subtle hints entirely. And because the subordinates are entirely paralyzed by their cultural programming, unable to break protocol to save their own lives, they fly a perfectly functioning airplane directly into the ground.
I want you, the listener, to just take a second to process the gravity of that. Think about the sheer, terrifying power of culture. It is so deeply embedded in our subconscious that linguistic politeness and deference to authority literally overrode the fundamental biological instinct for physical survival.
It is a sobering, tragic reality. But understanding the mechanism of the tragedy is also what allowed the airline to completely fix the problem.
Right. The solution to Korean Air's awful safety record wasn't to put the pilots back in flight simulators. They knew how to fly. The solution was a targeted psychological, cultural intervention. The airline brought in an American aviation expert who mandated a radical change. From that day forward, all communication in the cockpit had to be conducted entirely in English.
Why English? Because language and culture are inextricably linked. The Korean language has highly complex, built-in hierarchical honorifics that constantly reinforce the power dynamic between the speaker and the listener.
Whereas English is more direct.
English, relatively speaking, is a flat, blunt language. By forcing the pilots to speak English, the airline was essentially forcing them to step outside of their native cultural hierarchy. They were given a new, artificial identity inside the cockpit. In English, a subordinate first officer could bluntly say, "Captain, pull up," without triggering the deep-seated cultural shame of disrespecting an elder.
It rewired their power dynamics.
Yeah.
And it worked. Korean Air's safety record completely turned around. It is absolute proof that we carry our ancestors into every single room or every cockpit we enter. We are not blank slates.
Which naturally leads us to our final profound realization. If cultural legacy dictates how we communicate during a crisis, how does it dictate how we handle daily frustration? How does it shape our willingness to persevere when a task becomes incredibly difficult?
This is a great transition.
We are going to explore this by looking at rice paddies, questionnaires, and the key IPP solution.
If you have ever wondered why students from Asian countries consistently dominate global math and science competitions year after year, this is the answer. And I promise you, it has absolutely nothing to do with Asian brains being genetically wired for higher mathematics.
That's cultural.
Yes. It has everything to do with the history of agriculture, specifically the cultural legacy of wet rice farming.
There's a traditional Chinese proverb that perfectly encapsulates this cultural mindset. No one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich. I want you to think about the intense, unrelenting work ethic required to generate a proverb like that.
It's intense. Western agriculture historically was entirely different from Asian agriculture. In feudal Europe, a peasant might work hard during the harvest, but there were long, dormant periods in the winter where very little could be done.
Right, the ground freezes.
Exactly. Furthermore, under the feudal system, the peasant usually had to hand over the vast majority of their crop to a wealthy lord. There was very little incentive to work extra hours. But wet rice farming in the Pearl River Delta of China or the paddies of Japan, that is a completely different universe of labor.
What's the difference?
Rice farming is agonizingly difficult. Precision agriculture. You have to build complex terraces carved into the sides of mountains. You have to manage intricate irrigation systems, ensuring the water level is absolutely perfect. You have to plant individual seedlings by hand, knee-deep in mud. You have to meticulously weed the paddies daily. Researchers estimate that a traditional rice farmer put in an agonizing 3,000 hours of physical labor a year.
But here's the critical difference. Unlike the European peasant, the rice farmer often operated under a system where they paid a fixed rent and they got to keep everything else they produced. The math was simple and undeniable. The harder you worked, the more meticulously you weeded your paddy, the higher your yield, and the wealthier your family became. It is the ultimate historical example of meaningful work.
So you have centuries of culture in China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan built entirely on this legacy of grueling, precise, highly rewarding labor. Now, how on earth does playing in the mud translate to dominating calculus exams?
Because advanced mathematics is rarely about innate genius. Advanced mathematics is almost entirely about persistence and a willingness to endure frustration. A professor of mathematics named Alan Schoenfeld conducted an incredibly revealing experiment to prove this.
Tell us about Renee.
He brought a college student, whom we will call Renee, into his lab. He sat her down in front of a computer program and gave her a very tricky algebra problem involving calculating the slope of a line on a grid. And he videotaped her trying to solve it.
Now, most Western students, when faced with a confusing multi-step math problem that they don't immediately understand, will give up very quickly. The cultural programming in the West is that math is an innate talent. You either get it or you don't. If you don't get it in the first 30 to 60 seconds, you assume you just aren't a math person, and you quit.
But Renee's reaction on the videotape was entirely different. Schoenfeld taped her struggling with this one specific slope problem for an astonishing 22 consecutive minutes. She is frowning, she is frustrated, she tries one equation, it fails, she deletes it, she tries another, but she absolutely refuses to surrender.
She keeps grinding.
Yes. She sits with the agonizing frustration for 22 minutes until she finally has the aha moment and cracks the equation. That willingness to sit with a problem for 22 minutes is the secret to mastering mathematics.
And we can actually prove this phenomenon on a global scale. There was an educational researcher named Erling Boe who was analyzing the results of the TIMSS test, that massive international math test we mentioned earlier. When students around the world sit down to take this math test, they're also required to fill out a mind-numbingly long, incredibly tedious background questionnaire.
It's something like 120 detailed questions, right?
Yes, about their parents' education, their daily habits, and their home life. It is exhausting just to read.
Boe made a discovery that is almost comedic in its simplicity. He realized that you don't even need to look at the students' actual math scores to rank which countries are the best at mathematics. All you have to do is look at the questionnaire.
Really? Just the questionnaire?
Yes. The countries whose students possess the sheer diligence, patience, and stamina to carefully fill out every single question on that boring 120-question survey are the exact same countries that score the absolute highest on the math portion of the exam.
The willingness to endure tedious effort is the mathematical advantage. And who are the top countries on that list? Singapore, South Korea, China, Taiwan, and Japan. Every single one of them is a culture built upon the historical legacy of the rice paddy. They have inherited an ancestral willingness to work hard, to focus on the details, and to fundamentally reject the idea of giving up when things get complicated.
So if that is the underlying mechanism of the Asian mathematical advantage, we must turn our lens back to the American education system. Why is there such a massive, seemingly insurmountable achievement gap between wealthy children and poor children in the United States? To answer this, we look at a landmark study conducted by sociologist Carl Alexander in Baltimore.
Right, the Baltimore study.
He tracked the standardized test scores of poor children, middle-class children, and wealthy children over the course of 5 years of elementary school.
And what he found completely destroys our entire political narrative about public schools. We are constantly told that inner-city public schools are fundamentally broken and that they are failing poor children. But Alexander's data revealed the exact opposite.
Wait, really? The schools are working?
Yes. If you look strictly at the academic school year, the months between September and June, the poor kids and the wealthy kids learned reading and math at the exact same rate. The schools were actually functioning perfectly.
The devastating divergence didn't happen in the classroom. It happened during the summer. Over the long 3-month American summer vacation, the wealthy children are completely immersed in their parents' concerted cultivation. They are sent to space camp, they are enrolled in elite reading programs, they visit museums, they travel. Consequently, their test scores actually increase over the summer break.
But the poor children, they lack access to those expensive resources. They spend the summer watching television or playing outside. Their academic minds lie dormant, and their test scores significantly regress.
It is the Matthew effect all over again. The rich get richer. Over 5 years of elementary school, those summer regressions accumulate, compounding year after year until the wealthy kids are light years ahead of the poor kids. The American school system, with its incredibly long agrarian-based summer break, is essentially a massive structural mechanism designed to punish children who don't have wealthy parents.
Once you identify the mechanism of failure, you can engineer a solution. And that solution involves artificially injecting the intense, unrelenting rice paddy mindset into the American inner city.
Enter the KPP Academy. KPP is a network of experimental public charter schools, and Gladwell profiles a specific branch in the South Bronx of New York. The founders of KPP looked at Carl Alexander's data regarding the summer gap, and they made a radical decision.
What did they do?
They said, we cannot change the socioeconomic status of these families, but we can fix the gap with sheer overwhelming amounts of time.
The student population at KPP is overwhelmingly from low-income neighborhoods, but the schedule they are subjected to is grueling. A standard public school runs from roughly 8:00 a.m. to 3:00 p.m. CAS-PP starts at 7:25 a.m. and goes until 5:00 p.m. They mandate school attendance on Saturdays.
Saturdays, too.
And most importantly, they mandate 3 extra weeks of intensive schooling during the summer break. They're essentially demanding 50 to 60% more active learning time than a standard school.
Gladwell profiles a specific KPP student, a young middle schooler named Marita. Marita wakes up at 5:45 in the morning. She navigates the subway to get to school by 7:25. She works intensely until 5:00 p.m. She commutes home, grabs a quick dinner, and then sits down to do 2 to 3 hours of rigorous homework, often not getting to bed until midnight.
She is 12 years old.
I know. Her daily schedule mirrors the relentless intensity of Joe Flom working at a corporate law firm or an Asian farmer tending to a rice paddy. She is sacrificing her evenings, her weekends, and a massive portion of her carefree childhood.
It is an incredibly heavy bargain for a child to make, but she is making that bargain for a very specific reason. She's attempting to forcibly manufacture the accumulative advantage that she was denied by her birth circumstances. She did not inherit the luxury of concerted cultivation from a wealthy family, so the KPP Academy is artificially providing it through thousands of hours of brute force time and discipline.
And the data proves it works. The vast majority of KPP students, despite their socioeconomic disadvantages, end up performing well above their grade level in mathematics, and a massive percentage of them go on to attend 4-year colleges.
It brings this entire deep dive directly back to you, the listener. It forces a deeply personal question. Are you walking through life relying entirely on your natural talent, just hoping that your innate IQ will be enough to carry you through? Or are you willing to sit in front of a frustrating problem for 22 minutes like Renee? Can you adopt the rice paddy mindset? Can you embrace the grueling reality of 10,000 hours?
Because what every single one of these deeply researched stories demonstrates, from the bizarre birth dates of Canadian hockey players, the incredible luck of Bill Gates, to the linguistic tragedy of Flight 801, to the exhaustion of Marita in the Bronx, is that human achievement is a massively complex tapestry. It is an intricate combination of arbitrary systemic advantages, deep cultural inheritances, and sheer chronological timing.
So let's pull all of these narrative threads together into a unified theory. True success is simply not a solo endeavor. The concept of the purely self-made man is a romantic myth that needs to be retired. Bill Gates could not have launched the digital revolution without the incredible luck of the Lakeside Mothers Club rummage sale.
Absolutely.
The Beatles would not be global icons without the oppressive, exhausting strip clubs of Hamburg forcing them to play. Joe Flom wouldn't be a legal titan without the discrimination that forced him into proxy fights. And the Medicine Hat Tigers wouldn't be national champions if the arbitrary cutoff date was in July instead of January.
And recognizing this reality should not evoke a sense of nihilism or depression. Quite the opposite. It should be profoundly liberating.
Liberating? How so?
Acknowledging the massive role of luck, timing, and cultural context in our lives does not diminish the value of our hard work. It properly contextualizes it. If we finally understand that success is not just magic, but is actually manufactured by specific systems and environmental opportunities, it means we possess the power to engineer better systems. We can manufacture more success.
Yes, that is the ultimate takeaway. If the data clearly proves that a January 1st cutoff date is literally destroying the athletic potential of half of our children, then we need to restructure the system and create 2 parallel leagues based on birth month. If we know for a fact that a 3-month summer vacation permanently destroys the academic trajectory of low-income kids, we need to fundamentally extend the school year.
Right, changes the system.
If we know that practical intelligence is just as critical as raw IQ, we need to stop teaching kids to blindly fear authority and start actively teaching them how to negotiate and advocate for themselves. We do not have to passively sit around waiting for the lucky, genetically gifted few to randomly rise up. We could build the infrastructure to lift everyone up.
Gladwell brings this point home beautifully by ending his book with a deeply personal epilogue. He turns the analytical microscope onto his own life. He traces his incredible success as a best-selling author back to his roots in Jamaica.
What's his story?
He tells the story of his grandmother, Daisy Nation, and details how a highly specific series of structural advantages, a lucky, random scholarship, and the disturbing but very real societal privilege afforded to her lighter skin color within the colonial hierarchy of Jamaica fundamentally altered his mother's trajectory. That altered trajectory allowed his mother to receive an education, which ultimately allowed Gladwell himself to be in the position he is today.
He's living proof of his own theory.
Yes. He readily admits he is not a self-made genius. He is the direct product of history, culture, and profound luck.
So, As we wrap up this journey, here's the final provocative thought experiment I want to leave you with. Tomorrow, when you wake up, take a hard look at the systems you actively operate within. Look at your corporate workplace, your specific industry, your local community, or your children's school. How many arbitrary cutoff dates, invisible biases, or hidden cultural barriers are silently operating in the background? Are you tossing out resumes because a candidate didn't attend an elite university, completely ignoring the threshold effect of intelligence?
Are you promoting only the loud, convergent thinkers and ignoring the quiet, divergent geniuses like Poole?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And most importantly, if you're in a position of power and you have the ability to change those systems, how many brilliant suppressed minds could you unlock who are currently just sitting on the wrong side of the calendar waiting for a chance to play?
We must stop staring at the X-ray machine, desperately looking for the clean, jagged white line of individual fault or individual brilliance.
The X-ray is broken. Success is murky, it is intensely messy, and it is deeply, inextricably rooted in community, timing, and profound luck. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Look closer at the hidden roots of the success and the failure all around you. And always remember, no one, absolutely no one, does it alone.